Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today into something, well, seemingly simple, but actually quite complex. A dessert that feels historic, comforting, and, totally global.
The Belgian waffle.
Exactly. But here's the thing, and be honest. When you see one or order one, do you actually know the difference? Like the real cultural distinction between a Brussels and a Liège waffle.
That really is the key question, isn't it? Because the differences aren't just like about how they taste or feel.
Hmm.
They're rooted in geography, history.
Uh-huh.
We've been digging through a whole stack of sources on this history. Regional recipes, cooking secrets, even the marketing story. It's quite a journey.
Right. And our goal here is to sort of trace that evolution.
Yeah.
How did we get from, say, a simple medieval wafer to this global food icon?
It's a fascinating story of tradition meeting, well, some pretty clever marketing later on.
So where does it even start? You mentioned medieval.
Yeah, way back. The sources point to around the 12th century in Europe, and the inspiration wasn't even really for dessert as we think of it. No, it came from monasteries, actually. Monks used to bake these thin wafers called oblates for religious events. Very plain.
Wow. Okay, so hang on. You're saying this rich, golden, fluffy thing we love started out as basically a communion wafer. That's a huge leap.
It absolutely is. From something quite solemn and, let's face it, probably bland,
Right.
to something much richer. Once these wafers moved outside the monastery walls, cooks started adding things like honey, eggs, butter, better ingredients.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
They became known as gaufres,
Yeah.
and suddenly they weren't just functional, they were celebratory, kind of a luxury item for feasts.
Yeah.
That whole shift sets the scene.
And like with so many famous foods, there's a branding story tucked away in there somewhere, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most surprising things we found is that the name Belgian waffle, the one everyone in North America knows,
Yeah.
that's basically a marketing invention from 1964 specifically for the American market. We'll definitely get into the guy behind that.
Okay, can't wait for that. But first, the tradition he was, well, rebranding. You mentioned two styles emerged.
Exactly. By the 18th century, things had settled into two main camps in Belgium. Two distinct styles really tied to their cities, Brussels and Liège.
Okay, let's break those down. Let's start with the one that maybe traveled more easily, the Brussels waffle. What defines that one?
The Brussels waffle is, well, it's the elegant one. Think light, think rectangular, think those really deep square pockets.
Right, the classic shape.
Exactly. And the texture is crucial. It's got to be incredibly airy inside, almost like a cloud, but with a nice, delicate crispness on the outside.
And how is it typically served?
Traditionally, in Belgium, pretty simply, just a dusting of powdered sugar, maybe some whipped cream or fruit, but often just the sugar. It's usually eaten sitting down, maybe for breakfast or afternoon tea. It's got kind of formality to it.
Okay, elegant, airy, rectangular. Got it. Now, pivot to Liège. You said it's totally different.
Completely different beast. If the Brussels waffle is sophisticated, the Liège waffle is, let's say, robust. It's denser, much sweeter, and it's not even made from a batter.
Not a batter. What then?
It's made from a dough, a thick yeasted brioche dough, actually. So
Yeah.
right away, it's got more chew, more substance.
Brioche dough. Interesting.
And it's designed to be street food. You eat it with your hands, usually warm. It's immediate gratification.
And the sweetness. There's something special about that, right? The defining feature.
Ah, yes. The magic ingredient, pearl sugar.
Pearl sugar. Explain that.
It's these little hard nuggets of compacted sugar. They don't fully melt when you cook the waffle. Instead, they get mixed into the dough.
Mm-hmm.
And when that dough hits the hot iron, the sugar caramelizes, like really caramelizes. It creates this amazing, crunchy golden crust all over the waffle. It's incredible.
Wow. So it's not just sweetness, it's texture, a crunchy shell.
Exactly. That's the signature. The research suggests this idea. Adding the pearl sugar probably came from a chef working for the Prince Bishop of Liège back in the 18th century. There are even records like from the Liège Gastronomy Archive in 1842 detailing these caramelizing techniques. It's a point of serious regional pride.
So you have this real contrast. The plated, airy Brussels style versus the handheld, dense, crunchy Liège style.
Right. Formality versus, immediate joy. And keeping that contrast in mind is actually pretty helpful when we talk about how the world got the name Belgian waffle.
Okay, so let's go there. Two distinct traditions. How did one, specifically the Brussels style, end up representing the whole country internationally? You mentioned 1964?
Yes, the 1964 New York World's Fair. That was the moment. A Belgian chef named Maurice Vermersch brought his waffles, the Brussels style, to the fair. Big audience, lots of exposure.
Okay.
But he ran into a potential problem right away, a marketing problem.
Which was? He had the Brussels waffle. Why not just call it that?
Well, he figured, probably correctly, that in 1964 America, Brussels didn't necessarily scream delicious food destination to most people.
Ah, I see. Might have sounded a bit obscure.
Exactly. He worried it was too specific, maybe he wouldn't have that broad appeal. So he made a really smart call. He just broadened it, called it the Belgian waffle. Simple, national, easy to grasp.
That's actually genius. It stuck, obviously. The records from the World's Fair apparently showed just how well that worked.
Totally. But it wasn't just the name change that made it a hit. Vermeersch also changed how it was served.
Right, because powdered sugar alone might not have wowed the American crowd quite as much.
Probably not. He needed something more spectacular, so he took that light, warm waffle and topped it generously with sliced fresh strawberries and a big dollop of whipped cream.
The classic American topping.
That's the one. And that combination, the light waffle, the fresh fruit, the cream, it's just an instant sensation. People went crazy for it. That presentation plus the catchy new name.
Yeah.
Boom. Global icon status almost overnight.
Wow. It really shows how much presentation and, well, branding matter, doesn't it?
It really does. The context can be just as important as the food itself sometimes.
Okay, so that explains the fame. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about the how, the technique. What makes that Brussels waffle, the one Vermeersch brought over, so different from, say, a standard American breakfast waffle? Beyond the shape, I mean.
Well, the deeper pockets and the larger grid size are part of it.
Right.
They hold more toppings, obviously.
Right.
But the real secret is achieving that contrast. Super crispy on the outside, super light and fluffy on the inside. It's about aeration.
Aeration, not just baking powder or yeast.
Those help, but the key technique, especially for the Brussels style, involves the eggs. You have to separate them.
Okay.
You whip the egg whites separately. Like, really whip them until they form stiff peaks. You're basically creating a stable foam full of tiny air bubbles.
Ah, like making a meringue or something.
Sort of, yeah. And then, and this is crucial, you gently fold those whipped whites into the rest of the batter. You don't just stir them in.
Why fold? What happens if you just mix?
If you mix too aggressively, you knock all that air out, you deflate the whites, and you end up with a denser waffle, not that signature light, airy texture. Folding keeps the air in.
Got it. So that careful folding is essential. Now, for anyone listening who wants to try making these at home, the sources we looked at had some specific pro tips, right? Beyond just the recipe itself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. 5 key things kept coming up.
Okay, let's run through them. Tip number 1 seems a bit counterintuitive. Be patient.
Right. Rest the batter for at least 30 minutes, maybe even longer, before you cook it.
Why? What does resting do?
It lets the gluten relax. When you mix batter, you develop gluten. If that gluten's all tight and tense when it hits the hot iron, your waffle will be tough, maybe a bit chewy. Resting lets it chill out, basically, leading to a more tender result.
Makes sense. Gluten needs to relax. Okay, tip number 2, heat.
Yes, high heat is essential. You need that waffle iron hot, hot enough to sear the batter the moment it touches the plates.
Searing. Why is that important?
That quick sear does 2 things. It creates the crispy exterior everyone loves, and it helps lock in moisture so the inside stays tender and cooks quickly without drying out.
Okay, high heat for crispiness. Number 3, fat matters.
Big time. Use real butter. Always. The sources were pretty emphatic about this.
Not margarine.
Nope. Margarine apparently dulls the flavor, can make the texture a bit greasy. Real butter gives you that nice golden color, that rich taste. It's just better for this.
Good to know. Real butter only. Tip 4 goes back to what you said about folding.
Oh, avoid over mixing. Once you've mixed your dry and wet, and especially once you've folded in those egg whites, just stop. Less is more.
Why? What happens if you keep going?
Well, you deflate those air bubbles we just talked about, making it dense. And you also overdevelop the gluten again, making it tough. So mix until just combined, and that's it.
Right. Don't undo all that careful work. And the last tip, number 5, is about the iron itself.
Yeah, practical one. Grease the iron lightly before every single waffle.
Even non-stick ones.
Even nonstick. A little brush of oil or melted butter just ensures a clean release, keeps the waffle shape perfect, and actually helps with the crisping too.
Okay, those are great tips. Rest, high heat, real butter, don't overmix, and grease every time. Got it. Now, thinking about Belgium again, these waffles aren't just food, are they? They seem to mean more.
Oh, definitely. They're a real symbol of comfort, maybe even national pride over there. And the two styles still have distinct cultural roles.
How so?
Well, like we said, the Brussels waffle is often the more formal sit-down affair. But the Liège waffle, that's still the ultimate grab-and-go street food.
Because it holds up better.
Exactly. That dense brioche dough, that caramelized sugar crust. It holds its heat, holds its shape. Perfect for eating while walking around. It represents that sort of everyday, accessible pleasure.
And this isn't just anecdotal, right? This significance is actually recognized.
It is. We found that the waffle is officially recognized by UNESCO as part of Belgium's gastronomic heritage. That's a pretty big deal.
Wow, UNESCO recognition. That says a lot. And that World's Fair debut in '64, it even led to its own day.
It did. Apparently, following that huge success, March 25th was eventually designated as International Waffle Day, a direct nod to that American introduction.
So when you put it all together, you go from medieval monks' wafers
Mm-hmm.
to an 18th century chef getting creative with pearl sugar
Right.
to a 20th century marketing masterstroke at a World's Fair. It's quite the journey packed into one pastry.
It really is.
Yeah.
Tradition, innovation, global spread. One source put it really nicely, called a great Belgian waffle, happiness pressed between golden grids. Captures that feeling, doesn't it?
It does. Happiness, history, warmth,
Yeah.
all in there. Okay, let's leave our listeners with a final thought, circling back to that core difference.
The Brussels versus Liège rivalry.
Yeah, think about those two experiences again. The Brussels style, elegant, maybe requires a plate, a fork, a moment to sit. It implies a certain separation, a formality. Then the Liège style, all about that intense caramelization, designed to be eaten right away, by hand, maybe on the street. Immediate, direct pleasure.
So the closing thought is really about what that contrast might tell us, about a place or a culture's personality. Does the formal style reflect one side of Belgium, maybe, while the instant street food joy of the Liège waffle reflects another?
Exactly. How do these culinary traditions, these choices about dough and sugar and how you eat something, reflect deeper aspects of national character? Something to chew on next time you see a Belgian waffle.